This is my very first encounter ever with something nefarious out in the wilderness. I was 17 at the time, and honestly, quite terrified of my surroundings. I had gone camping with my family, and unbeknownst to me, I would encounter something strange that night. See, while I was sleeping in my tent, my older brother, who I was sleeping next to, would wake me up in the middle of the night. I guess he had to go pee really bad. He was only 5 years older than me, and even though he was 16, I was kind of the braver younger brother. So I got up with him, accompanying him out maybe 50 feet into the forest, while he went and relieved himself. Our parents were fast asleep in the adjacent tent. As he was peeing, and I'm standing there just a little ways away from him, we hear something walking around in the woods right next to us. I had a flashlight with me. He had a cell phone light. We both shined it in that direction, but didn't see anything. Whatever. So he gets done, which felt like forever. The man had drinking like 4 or 5 bottles of water. We go back to bed, lay down in our tent, and we're just kind of talking how brothers do. We both hear the faint sound of our mom, except it's coming from the forest, and it sounds like her saying, "Hey, boys, come back here. I want to talk to you." And so my brother and I are just kind of looking at each other in complete disbelief, being like, "What? How is that our mom? Our mom was asleep in the tent right next to us. What?" And the voice keeps telling us to come here. Now we're both pretty freaked out because this voice is almost perfectly imitating our mother. Our dad is snoring, and our mom is also sound asleep. There's no way that whoever or whatever could be perfectly imitating our mother's voice. We kind of just sit there, huddling in fear, kind of scared crapless, to be honest. After maybe a couple of minutes, the noises stop entirely. And when they do, we notice the forest along with it is now quiet. No crickets, no wind, no howls, nothing. It's just dead silent. So I prod my older brother, "Hey, maybe we should go investigate." But he was basically like, "No way I'm going out there. Not after hearing that." I mean, he was genuinely scared. And I can't deny that I wasn't either. But I was also curious. And the little brother in me was like, I have to defend this family if he won't. So I decided to get up out of the tent and have a look around myself, with my older brother begging me not to go. I get out, shine my flashlight around, and of course I don't see anything, anywhere. So I decided to go walk over to where I had heard the noises initially, at least the voices. I saw nothing. No sign of anyone, or anything the voices could be coming from. So I walked back to the tent, still scared. The forest was still silent, and I had no answers. I was no closer to finding out what or who had mimicked our mother so perfectly. So my brother and I just sat in the tent and talked, and eventually we fell asleep, both still scared. In the morning time, my parents seemed happy and chipper more than usual. They asked us, "Did you guys sleep well last night?" We slept exceptionally well. I told them, yeah, it was kind of a rough night for both of us. My brother and I did not mention to our mother that we had heard her voice off in the woods, and we knew at no point in the night did she ever get up to leave her tent. I mean, my mom wouldn't go and just pee in the woods. That's not her. There was actually a faculty bathroom, not even that far away. Maybe a 3-4 minute walk? So, if anything, that's where she would have went. And she pretty much never is a get up in the night type of person to go use the bathroom. Anyway, I can't help but wonder what it was out there that we encountered that was able to mimic the voice almost perfectly of my mother, deep in the woods, in the complete opposite direction of where my parents' tent were. Back in 2008, I had got into a nasty fight with my girlfriend. Long story short, she kicks me out of the car in the middle of nowhere at midnight and drove off, leaving me entirely by myself in the darkness of the desert. I had no choice but to just start walking, using only my phone as a flashlight in the dark. It gets extremely dark in the desert at nighttime, and I'm all alone, so I was a little freaked out. As I'm just walking along on this road, all by myself, I hear something towards me. I stopped, and it was quiet. I shone my light around and began listening, but I didn't hear anything. I started walking again, and again. It kept getting closer and closer. Now, I was starting to get nervous and scared because something was coming for me. I started running now, and could hear something begin running after me in the darkness. It was really coming for me. I was sprinting as fast as I could down this road. I tripped and fell to the ground. The noise stopped, and I lay there for a minute, trying to catch my breath, while I could hear what was coming after me had stopped. I scrambled to my feet, shining my light all around, and I couldn't see a thing. Then I heard something snarling just beyond the light reach of my phone. I stood there, frozen in fear for a few seconds, in the dark, only hearing this thing snarling at me. It was probably about a few feet from me. I panicked, shined my phone at it, and for the first time, I saw it. It was a coyote, but it was all wrong. It appeared ugly and disfigured and looked evil. I was so scared I just ran and did not stop running down the road in the dark, hearing this thing running behind me, getting closer and closer. I was so scared, I didn't know what to do. Then, just right over the horizon, I see the headlights of a car coming in my direction. I began waving my hands and jumping up and down. I was so happy to see this car. Then, as it got closer, I saw that it was my girlfriend. I could see that it was her. She slowed down and stopped right in front of me. She looks at me like I was crazy and asked what was wrong. In a sneer, she asks, "Scared of the night?" and demanded I get in the car now. She could see I was spooked and just made fun of me on the drive back about how she thought I was going to be such a wimp about it. I told her what had happened, what had chased me. She didn't believe me. I just wanted to go home and sleep. I never really told anyone else about it. I was scared they'd think I was crazy too, but it was pretty terrifying. She thought I was just trying to make her feel guilty, which was not the case. Even what she did was wrong, though. After that night, our relationship kind of crumbled, and not just because of this isolated incident. There were other things building up to it. She wasn't really the nicest of persons, and something like what happened that night just kind of sealed the deal. The next day, though, she tried to convince me it was just my imagination, and I really needed to grow up. I explained that there was this coyote thing chasing me, and even though it was a coyote, it wasn't. It looked all wrong. Anyway, I'm sorry if my story is dumb or anything, but I'm telling you, that was the scariest experience I have ever had in the night out in the desert. I've never been an experienced outdoors person, and I made the mistake one summer to go camping by myself when I encountered something I was not prepared for. I always knew I should have never gone camping alone, but I did it anyway, like I was trying to prove something. I made a major mistake, of course, being a rookie and being so nervous about it. I forgot one crucial thing: shelter. I packed my backpack with enough food and water, but I forgot my sleeping bag. I didn't want to turn around and call my friend, telling them I was too scared to camp. So I just decided I would just find some leaves and make a makeshift bed. I did have a small tent, so I guess I did have shelter after all, but I needed to do something. So, getting nervous and trying to calm myself down about what I was going to do in this strange predicament, I decided meditation would be my best takeaway. So, I found a nice spot and sat down for a while and tried meditating. I had come all this way and made all this time sacrificed. I was not going to give up now. This was a nice spot near a large lake. I had a beautiful view and a nice breeze. It was making things a little easier for me. I thought this would be the perfect place to meditate. I sat down, closed my eyes, and opened them, and started to meditate again. Just as I had my eyes closed, and I was really focusing in, a very loud crackling sound comes from the woods. This is where the story kind of changes. So I opened my eyes and looked around. I couldn't believe what I saw. Not even 30 feet away from me was this huge black bear. So I sat there frozen, tried to meditate again. I mean, I had no other option. I felt if, like, I were to get up and run away, this thing would have chased me and eaten me. I could feel my heart beating really fast. I thought if I just sat quietly, maybe it would go away. But I was wrong. The bear kept coming closer and closer, and it was making these strange noises, like huffing and groaning. I began to pray to God that it wouldn't come any closer, and I would be okay. I knew if the bear got closer, I would probably have to fight it off with my hands or something, which I knew was not a reality. This bear waltzes right up to me. It begins sniffing me, acting very strange. I stay as still as possible, not knowing exactly what to do. I'm sitting there, squeezing my eyes shut, not exactly sure what's going to happen next. And then, this bear just stops, stands up. I swear to you, this next part is real. I know it's common for bears to stand up on their hind legs, but this thing was standing different than a bear usually does. It was standing more like a man does, and even began chanting, as I recall. The bear began chanting, and I swear to you, I heard a voice say this aloud. It was almost telepathic, because the voice appeared in my head, not audibly. I heard the voice say this: "It's not what you think it is." I heard that loud and clear, and I opened my eyes again, and I saw this bear transform into a man, standing there almost like a statue. Now I'm terrified, and in front of me I'm seeing this person, what looks to be exactly like an old Native American man, covered in a large bear headdress with large animal skin draped over him, staring at me. This is all happening really, really fast, and I just don't know what to do. This person or thing just stands there, and I'm frozen in fear, not knowing what I should do. I don't know if it's a dream or what at this point, but I know I'm not dreaming. I know I'm awake. The next thing I know, this thing or person is chanting again, this time louder, and I swear, I hear the voice say again, "You have to go." And I had this vision of myself walking off into the woods, and suddenly I'm back in my tent. I don't know how I got there, but I'm actually in a sleeping bag this time, and I see a big sunbeam coming through the tent. I'm sitting up and it was morning time. Somehow, I don't know if I arrived in an alternate reality or what, because somehow I have a sleeping bag when I didn't bring one before. I was completely confused at how it was morning time, early morning, when I was meditating in around the mid to late evening. But all I knew was that I was alive. I didn't know what happened, but I knew I was very lucky. So, taking my chances, I packed up my tent and left. I can't even begin to describe to you just how freaky the entire thing was. I've never been one to hallucinate or just make up stories. Everything I'm telling you is true. I felt that I was very lucky to be alive. I don't know why I was spared. Maybe it was to tell this story. I don't know. I know that I will never go camping again by myself. I used to think it was just a coincidence, that I was attacked by a bear and that it was just some animal trying to protect its territory. Now, I believe that I was spared because it was maybe an omen. The Native Americans believed that there were these spirits that lived in the woods. They called them shapeshifters. I believe that that is what I encountered, and that it was some sort of shape-shifting spirit in the form of a physical, large black bear. Why it came up to me, though, and targeted me, I'll probably never know. One time, while out by a large river that runs by my cousin's house in Ohio, I saw a strange figure moving quickly through the woods. It was like a large black panther that was walking on two legs. It had the same body shape and size of what you'd see as a large black panther. It had no tail and I could not see any ears. I watched it for a few moments as it moved quickly and swiftly through the woods. I could not see any eyes or discern any hair. I was so shocked that I could not move at first. I was afraid if I moved it would see me. I was afraid it would come toward me, actually. It sure was strange looking. As it moved away from the river, it turned to the right and walked up a large hill toward a back road. I watched it all the way until it was completely out of sight. I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like that before. I believed I was seeing an alien. I think this because I have seen flying saucers in the sky. I also think I know what I saw because, well, I have seen a lot of strange things in my life. I've seen things that can't be explained. I saw something in the sky about maybe 7 months ago. My son and his girlfriend and I were sitting under a large tree in my backyard. I quickly saw a flash of light in the sky. It was maybe the size of a dime, and it was a flash of light that was so bright, I could not see anything else. The light was so bright, though, that it actually hurt my eyes. I was afraid to look up at it. I could not see anything else. I think what I saw was a flying saucer. I think this because the light was so bright and fast. But I have seen other things in the sky that I cannot explain. I have seen them when I was a child, and being born in 1942, I've been seeing strange things as long as I can remember. But the weirdest part about the whole Black Panther creature experience was that it appeared to have a skull-like head. Almost kind of reminded me of a skull head covering that some Native Americans used to wear back long ago. That's what it reminded me of. I've been out in the woods here and there my whole life, and I've not seen anything like that till this sighting. And call me what you will, but the thought of it alone still spooks me. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and have lived in the Kansas City area my entire life. Moved out here to Ohio about 10 years ago. In the mid-60s, I saw what I thought was a UFO while I was driving home from work at night. I was on the highway just about 2 miles south of the KCI airport. I was on the frontage road when I saw the object. There was a very large glowing oval-shaped object, and it was going from horizon to horizon very fast. It was so large that it took up the entirety of the road, and it was kind of a glowing reddish color. I thought it was going to hit the ground, and I was going about 60 miles an hour, and it was moving very fast. So I stopped the car to watch it, and I could still see it, as if it were moving sideways. It was going so fast that it was still there when it went over the horizon. It was like it went over the horizon in about 3 seconds. I could not see anything else in the sky when I saw this. No stars and no other lights. It was so large, I figured it must have been something out of this world. I've never seen anything like that before. What's weird is I've heard some other people in the area talk about UFO stuff, and then shortly after, mention seeing these large shadows of people or creatures with horns on their head, skeletal heads actually, that are reminiscent of Native American culture. The whole thing is very interesting, and I wonder if there's any correlation between the two. The following is from a man from the town of Newbury, Ohio. This town is located about 60 miles from where I live, and I have lived here all my life. The man tells of a strange event that took place back in the 60s. In the 1960s, there was a family of 4 that lived in Newbury. Their names were Mr. and Mrs. Ogston, and their 2 children, a boy and a girl. The household was rather strange in the fact that George and Ruth Ann were kind of odd, both very religious. Not in the sense of being a strict religious family, though, but they were very good, non-judgmental people. They appeared to be very nice. George and Ruth Ann were both in their late 30s, and their children were both in their teens. The boy's name was George Jr., and he was your very typical teenager, but also very shy and reserved, while the daughter was a very sweet girl and very intelligent. She was in her senior year of high school and was the older sister at the time of this strange event. One evening, George Jr. and his mother were sitting in the kitchen talking and listening to the radio. The radio that was in the kitchen was rather old and was on the fritz. It would turn on and off by itself, and you would have to turn it off and on again to get it to work. The radio was on, and George Jr.'s dad was in his bedroom in the back of the kitchen. George Jr. and his mother were sitting in the kitchen. George Jr. was leaning against the kitchen table, facing the door when the radio turned off. He looked up out of reaction and saw his mother suddenly looking up at the ceiling. He looks up and sees a strange shadow passing over them. It looked like a man with hands on his face, looking down at them, but it also resembled a wolf spirit, very native in appearance. It was very dark and looked like the shadow of a man covered in animal skins, not anything that was transparent. He said it passed over them very quickly, almost like a dark cloud passing over the sun. He said he was so scared that he ran out of the kitchen and ran up to his room. He said he stayed in his room for a long time after and never told anybody, and his mom would just never say a word about it. In the morning, George Jr. was getting ready for school, and his sister was just getting up. His sister told him that she had seen the strangest thing that morning. She said that she was in the bathroom brushing her hair when she looks up at the ceiling and sees this Native American man standing there, a Native American spirit. She said that it was so creepy, she screamed and ran out of the bathroom. She told her brother that it was the same figure that he saw in the kitchen the night before. George Jr. and his sister both later told their parents what they had seen, and they all thought it was a very strange occurrence. Perhaps this incident was caused by a Skinwalker spirit, or maybe a shapeshifter. I don't know, but I have to wonder. Well, as it turns out, within 100 yards of their house, years and years and years back, there was a large mass grave pit that was dug to throw the bodies of Native Americans in, once being slaughtered by the invading Western Europeans after a very small-scale skirmish had taken place over territory. At least 30 Native American soldiers were shot and killed, and their bodies thrown into a mass-dug grave and buried right there near that house. Is there a connection here? I lived out in the backcountry for many years, until I moved closer to the city. I've seen some things out there, things that would just creep you out. The scariest, though, was when I'm pretty sure we had this strange creature come onto our property. I'm pretty sure it was a skinwalker of some kind. I just remember hearing this weird howl in the night, and then we'd start seeing these big paw prints all along the ground. I remember my dad and I did have a big argument about it. He said that this creature never really came onto our property because it was scared of us since we lived there. I think he was just trying to pacify our overactive imagination. I told him, though, I thought it was a skinwalker, and that it could come and go as it pleases, since these beings possess so much black magic and raw power. It's scary. I think it was stalking me and my sister at one point or another, and I swear, I saw it. It was tall and skinny, and even had long claws at the end of its hand. It reminded me of a wolf that walks on two legs, but it looked like it was starving and frail. Had missing flesh all around its head, too. I don't know if I believed in Skinwalker stories, but I do believe in them now, and other creatures. I've also read about them, and I've seen things too. Not just this Skinwalker stuff. I know this sounds crazy. My dad ended up getting rid of the creature by using sage and driving it away for the time being. He still doesn't believe it was a Skinwalker, but believes it was something. I'm not sure what, though. It did not come back for a long time after that. I think it was gone for at least the rest of that year, until the following summertime when my dad got rid of it again with sage. But luckily, I had already moved away to Arizona for a while, and then back to Utah. That's also right around when I heard about a Wendigo. I've never seen anything myself, but I do believe after my experiences that they could be out here. I've heard some very strange stories of how these things like to eat, and they like to eat people, especially. I don't know if any of this is true, but I just wanted to share my story with you. I know it's not the scariest, but it is true. But I do have some questions about some of these other beings. I'm sure the Wendigo is real, just like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot. I just don't think they're as terrifying as people make them out to be. I think people maybe just have their own imagination, and they don't know what else to think of these beings. I do think, though, that if a Wendigo does exist, it probably doesn't eat people. I'm sure they just eat other animals, and I don't think they're as bad as people might make them out to be. But I guess I can never be too sure, because, after all, I can't imagine running into one of these things myself. I've never seen anything myself either. I'm sure I might be seeing my share of these, though. I'm planning on going on a camping trip this year, and I'm sure I'll see some Wendigos on that trip, if I'm lucky. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but before I end this email, I did hear a Wendigo story once. It goes something like this. There was a man who was out in the woods hunting, and he was looking for some food. He was getting pretty hungry and needed to eat. He was thinking of how he couldn't find any animals to kill for food. So he was thinking of what he could eat to quench his hunger. He was getting pretty desperate, as time and hours and days drew on. And now, he was thinking of how he'd eat anything. He wasn't finding anything out there, though. Not even a squirrel. He was getting so desperate to find food. But then I guess he finds some berries on the ground and begins to eat them. They were somewhat poisonous, I guess, but he didn't care. He just wanted to eat. He then notices a deer carcass laying on the ground. He didn't know what was going on, but figured the deer had probably died of natural causes. It did not have any visible or noticeable wounds, so he ate some of it raw. He figured that he was going to be sick, but he wasn't. He didn't feel sick at all. He actually felt pretty good. He felt stronger. He was thinking that this was amazing and he was actually able to eat this dead deer meat without feeling guilty. He was thinking that this was better than eating meat from an animal that he had killed. Easier to do so. He was feeling pretty good, strong and energized. He felt like he could do anything. like he had a superpower. There was something to that dead deer that apparently had changed him. It turns out, it wasn't just a dead deer carcass he had found. This dead deer supposedly had a hex cast over it by a Skinwalker witch that caused him to eat and gorge himself on the corpse of the deer like some rabid wild animal. The man soon ended up turning insane, ripping off his clothes, growing longer limbs, longer teeth and claws, and not long later, he became what's known as a Wendigo. Of course, it's just a story that I'd heard before growing up. But it does make you wonder, though, because stories have to come from somewhere. I think sometimes there might be truth to it, but maybe not to the extent the story makes it sound. Anyway, I've noticed that you're pretty good at telling stories, and I'm pretty sure that you know a lot about some of these creatures out there. I know that you know a lot about the Wendigo. I've heard some of the stories about these things that you've posted. I've also heard about Skinwalkers, minus my own experience, but just from your channel, I firmly believe they exist. I know they're out there, and I know you of course have heard of them. So before I end this, I just wanted to ask you some questions. Could you please answer? Do you believe in the Wendigo? Do you think Wendigos are real? Have you ever seen one? I've heard that Wendigos are like shapeshifters. I've also heard they can mimic people. Like they could be somebody that you know or see them around. I've heard they could also be a person that you're even friends with. Maybe even a family member. They can disguise themselves as anything and everything. They can, just like a Skinwalker, can shapeshift and transform into these cannibalistic beings. Anyhow, I'd love to hear back from you and know what you think about Skinwalkers and Wendigos and how the two relate. Just so you know, I'm a creature magnet. I'm serious. I've had a large handful of creature sightings all throughout my life, multiple times as a child, run-ins with Bigfoot, you name it. And I think this specific day that I encountered what I believe was a Skinwalker, forgive me if this ends up being a garbled mess, but I'm going to try and do my best to accurately portray these. Probably one of the stranger things I've ever had to deal with was when I was out of my deer stand one evening, and I saw this strange being that I could not identify what it was. I couldn't really see much of its features due to how dark it was, but there was enough light that I could tell it faintly had arms out in front of it, in a very hostile position. At least the stance it was in was. I had my rifle with me, and no idea what I was dealing with exactly, other than knowing it was not a person. I thought it might be a Bigfoot, so I was going to shoot it. I aimed at it with my rifle, took one deep breath, and then BAM! Fired off a shot. I hear this thing let out this terrible scream like I've never heard before, and took off running into the woods. I was pretty scared for a little bit because I didn't know if it was injured or what, so I immediately packed up and went inside. Didn't go back out from my stand for a couple of days. Now, real quick, before you jump on me for thinking I'm crazy for shooting something I don't know what, let me tell you that when you get a distinct feeling in the pit of your gut, like this thing is out to hurt you, or that there is something very wrong, you just know it. I trusted my instinct. I knew deep down that this was not a person or a deer. I knew I was dealing with something else entirely. Trust me on this one. I've had a few run-ins with Bigfoot myself, and even though those have all been fairly peaceful, I know there are things that go bump in the night. This thing, though, I can just tell its intent was not good. And I've seen some weird stuff in the woods before, but I think the most bizarre thing I've ever seen was this creature that I could not identify. Although, all the creatures I've ever seen, I could not identify. I don't know what this was or where it came from, but I can tell you with certainty, I know it was not a Bigfoot or a deer. It did not sound or look like any of the two. The closest comparison I can make for you is in the game Skyrim, which I used to play religiously years back. There are these creatures called hag ravens. They are half bird and half witch. Something like that, but these creatures in the game have talon-like claws in their hands. The creatures in that game are similar to what I saw, but not completely accurate. It looked more like a deer, but it had that same hunched-over stance position, and the same thing with its clawed hands stretched out. But honestly, I don't know what it was. I do know that it was not normal. And again, I've had many strange encounters in my life. This next one I'll share with you is what I believe to be a skinwalker as well. And I'm not sure if this was real or just a dream, but it happened when I was 12. Me and my family would always go fishing down by the creek, close to a campsite that we had frequently visited. It was a really nice little spot down there with a small fishing hole. I remember it was a very hot day this day, so we decided to go wade into the creek, swim around a bit and cool off. We were all in there cooling off, and my brother, my sister and I, and my dad and my mom. I remember I was wading in the creek with my dad when I looked up and saw some weird creature standing on the edge of the water, looking at us on the side with the trees. I remember it being this ugly, zombie-looking deer creature thing, tall and brownish in color, with long arms and claws and dead, dangly flesh and mangy-like skin. And it had some kind of weird elephant-like tail. It was just swaying back and forth, like it was thinking, plotting. Now, this creature looked completely different than the one in my tree stand story, and any of the other creatures I had seen. This one reminded me specifically of a cross between a man, a deer, and a zombie, I guess. Anyway, I don't know how I knew this, but I could just tell this thing was malevolent. It was staring at us, but I didn't think it was going to attack. It appeared to be plotting and strategizing. At least that was the gist I got. Like it was constructing its mind on how it was going to hurt or kill us. I don't know how to really explain it. I just knew deep down it was dangerous. I remember I looked up at my dad and told him to look, but he didn't. It's like he couldn't see it. Then, I remember we all began to wade out of the creek and walked back up to camp. That thing followed us, just standing there on the edge of the creek of the path that we were walking. It was watching us. I remember we all walked back up to our campsite, and I just had this sense that something was going to happen. I don't know why I felt that way. Fast forward a bit, and I remember that night, me and my family went to sleep in our tents. I woke up in the middle of the night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. I look up, shine my light, and see the silhouette of that thing standing just outside my tent. But it was just standing there, staring. It had its arms stretched out, like it was reaching for my tent. Then it stopped, as if I had caught it, and it froze. Then it just casually lowers its arms and walks off. I don't know why I saw it. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a dream, but it was so vivid. I still remember it happening to this day. I don't know. It was just one of the strangest things I'd ever seen. Extremely scary, though. I just don't know for real if it was actually there. Maybe it was a really vivid dream. Like I told you, I've had quite a few strange experiences that are hard to describe. Most of them have been in the form of just weird, unexplained noises that I've heard out in the woods, or even strange shapes and things moving about. I've had some other weird things happen, but I'll only share a handful more with you, just for the sake of keeping this email from getting to a novel. This one is probably one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. I was with my brother, and I believe this time we were four-wheeling. I remember, we were on this long trail when we see a strange creature standing in the distance. This one looked like a wolf, but it was different in color. It was very light, almost like a white wolf would be. But it was totally hard to see in the distance. But my brother and I were getting closer, and we're both looking at it. We couldn't quite make out what it was. We were driving along the trail, and the more we got to it, the closer we got. We could tell it was standing on its hind legs, and it had this weird coloring to it. It was very light brown. It was strange. It was just standing there looking at us. I remember my brother and I thinking to ourselves, what is that thing? It was very strange. So we got close to it, and it just turned and ran off into the woods. I've never seen one like that before. I don't know if that thing was a wolf or something else entirely. Maybe an alien wolf or something. I don't know. I don't know what that thing was, but I've never seen anything like it. I got the impression from that encounter that it was maybe curious or watching us, but I'll never forget the goat-like horns that sat on top of its head. Oh, and another thing I want to tell you about is yet another creature I've seen walking a trail by a logging road that we go to. I was out in the woods one day with my brother again, and we're walking across this old logging trail when we saw something move out of the corner of our eyes. We turned and looked, and there was this weird creature just standing there staring at us. It was a cross between a deer and a goat. I don't know what else to call it. I mean, it had a deer's body and a goat's head with horns. It had a long neck, and it was standing on its hind legs. It just stood there staring for a second, and then quickly turned and ran off. You want to hear another one that's weird? I was out hunting by myself one time, and sitting in my tree stand, and different than the first one I shared with you. I was watching the trail when, all of a sudden, this weird creature comes walking out of the woods. I remember it was a very sunny day, and I could see this thing clearly. It was a bipedal creature. It was maybe the same height about a man, maybe a little shorter, but it was hunched over like it was in pain. It had a long, thin body and was barefoot. It had long, skinny arms, legs, and very long, spindly fingers and a thin neck. No hair on it, but it did not look human. It had this weird head and no ears. It was a very strange-looking creature. I remember the strangest thing about it was that it had a weird-shaped head, very reminiscent to that of a horse. And I remember looking at it and thinking, what in the world is that? It walked along the trail and then it stopped. It just stopped and didn't move. I kept looking at it. I did not think it would come after me, but I was still scared. So I kept looking at it, wondering what I should do if it decided to come after me. I already knew. I would shoot it. I was just going to wait to see what it would do. It stood there for a few more minutes, perfectly still, and then vanished. Anyways, as I've said before, I've had to deal with a handful of these strange encounters and creatures, but man, some of these are just too much to handle for me. I hope you could at least get enjoyment out of my experiences. If anything, maybe they will be some use to you. Feel free to email me back if you have any questions. Not my story, but my grandmother, who grew up on the Navajo reservation. She has some pretty scary stories of encountering what she calls black witches. She refuses to name them by their name for fear of calling them. She always told me they are evil, and certain parts of the res you need to stay away from. They never show themselves to the living, and they have the power to possess the living. She told me that she was once attacked by one of these witches, and was unable to move until she was rescued. She told me that if I ever encountered one, I should close my eyes and pray for God's protection. When I asked her why she did not call the police before when seeing them, she responded that police can't do anything about them. They don't handle and refuse to handle paranormal and spiritual matters. These are demons, and that unless you yourself have the right power, you are powerless. My grandmother is a very strong woman, and I never for a second doubt anything she has said. She is not a liar. I know in my heart that she is a good, truthful woman. I am a full-fledged believer myself in the spiritual world, and she has had many encounters with spirits and have seen many others that things couldn't see. She has seen ghosts, orbs, shadow people, and all types of other things, including these shapeshifter beings, along with also having been attacked by them as well. She has also encountered what she believes are these strange reptilian demonic beings. She has seen them and has been attacked by them. She was in bed one night sleeping and heard an extremely loud sound, as if something was dropped down the stairs. It was loud enough to wake her up, so she opens her eyes and looks towards the door. She saw the shadow of a figure standing there. It wasn't that of a person. It was much larger. She tried to scream, but couldn't move. She was paralyzed. Only had the ability to blink her eyes. It was there for a few seconds and then was gone. She knows it was not of this world. She has had many other encounters with these shapeshifter spirits, and they all have one thing in common. They're evil. There was this one encounter, of course, that she had told me later on that it was trying to break in and harm her. She was around 12 or 13 when this happened, years and years back. You have to remember, these shapeshifter spirits are very violent. She also has a friend who lives in the middle of nowhere. She lives in a small town without any other houses around, except for her own. There's no power to her house, so she has to use solar panels to power her own lights. She has a large generator that powers. She has had many encounters with the paranormal herself. She, too, has seen shadow people, orbs, and many other things. Her house is constantly being attacked by these evil shape-shifting spirits, the same ones that attacked my grandmother at a young, tender age. She has seen it many times, and yes, it is terrifying. She has had her house broken into, destroyed. She has had many of her stuff broken and destroyed. She has even been attacked by these spirits like my grandmother, and has been scratched, stabbed, clawed, and worse. She has been awakened in the middle of the night, holding her chest in pain, and her heart feels as if it is going to explode out of her body. She has a feeling that these spirits are connected to her house. She says she feels these spirits are trying to take her over. She's been to the doctor and has had numerous tests. They cannot find anything wrong with her. She just says these things are trying to kill her, and that she is constantly being monitored. I know in my heart that the spirits are trying to take her life. The spirits are these shapeshifters who can astral project and attack in spirit form. The worst was when my grandmother was held down and, well, you know. The shapeshifter demon did that to her when she was 15, just to make her suffer while she had to lay there, agonizing, paralyzed. Even her grandfather suffered a massive stroke and heart attack at the hands of these beings. I don't know how much you know about them, but if you can, do yourself a favor and don't go anywhere near the res and stay away from these beings. A few years ago, I met a man. We connected instantly, and for a while, I thought he was my soulmate. The only problem was, he had to keep going out of town for work. I had no idea what he did, and he never told me. I knew he was lying to me, though, but I couldn't help but love him. I loved his accent, his wit, his passion, his personality. One night, I went to his house and he was in his kitchen, just staring at the wall. When he saw me, he said in a low voice, "I have to leave, I'm sorry." He had done this several times already. Strange behavior and leaving all the time. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "I can't do this anymore." He didn't say anything. He gave me a hug, escorted me out, and left as well. And that was the last time I saw him, and I never found out what he did, but I think he knows what I would do if I ever found out. So, a few days later, after I got home from my last trip to see him, I saw my neighbor walking her dog. She waved and we started chatting. I told her I was trying to get back into the dating scene, and she told me about this guy she had met. I don't know what it is about him, she said, but he's just so different. He's got a great sense of humor, and he's really into ancient cultures. I think he works for some big company. He's always going on these trips. I told her I had the same kind of feeling with the guy that I had been seeing. She told me he was the one, especially when she showed me the picture. Then she tells me that he says that he's a skinwalker, a witch who wears the skins of animals to become one with the animal spirit in order to take its powers. I was skeptical, but I had been feeling something strange about that guy. I had never even heard of a skinwalker, but as I began looking it up, I found a story in the news about a man who had been killed by his family while trying to steal their power. It said that the skinwalkers are born with the power to shapeshift, but they can acquire the powers of other animals by wearing their skin. I don't know what to think. I'm not sure if he's a skinwalker or just a liar with an animal fetish, and that he's somehow back from the dead. Either way, I'm done. I had a pretty incredible journey years back on what I like to call a spirit trip to the desert. While the trip was incredible, at the very least, I experienced something that terrified me and shook me to my core, and met the guardian of the woods. I just want to say up front that while I was taking ayahuasca, the encounter itself was more than just me dealing with physical beings. I was dealing with spiritual beings. You see, while being on ayahuasca, my third eye was opened and allowed me to come into contact with these spiritual entities. I was walking through the desert and going through this forested portion on a dark night when I heard rustling. So I turned to look and see what made the sound, and petrified when I see a row of dark figures approaching me. I knew down in my soul, these were skinwalkers. I tried to run, but they were too fast. They grabbed me, held me down. I felt their claws around my neck. They dragged me. I couldn't breathe. They were going to kill me. They were sucking the life force out of me, and I knew I was going to die. As I felt my life draining from my body, I closed my eyes and accepted my fate. Then I heard a voice. It was different. It was a deep man's voice, and he says, "I'm the protector of the forest. I am the protector of nature. I am the protector of the animals. I am the protector of the people. I am the protector of all things natural. Who are you to come into my land and try to destroy my people?" I felt the skinwalkers immediately release their grip, and I heard them say, "We are your people." And then I was alone. I saw this man, just him, and he tells me his name was Weya. He said that he was the protector, and I told him I was sorry that I had come into his land and disrupted his people. He let me go and allowed me to leave virtually unharmed, for the most part. I left that night a much stronger person, we'll just say that, and I've never endured such an experience before in my life. I know this story probably sounds kooky, and you might write me off as, "Oh, he was on ayahuasca," but I'm telling you, this night, I met spiritual interdimensional entities. That is what happened. One day, back last year, at the start of the whole pandemic, I sent my daughter on a grocery run because I'm partially disabled after a bad work accident nearly 9 years ago now. It was in the evening time, and we're roughly about an hour away from the store, so it would take her a bit of time to get there, get the food, and come back. Well, enough time had passed at that point that it was getting later and later, much past the point she should be getting back home, and I was getting concerned. I tried calling her phone, but much of the drive to the store is no service. By the way, we live out in the middle of nowhere, up in the mountains, and so there isn't much service through most of the drive. As it was getting later, now nearly an hour after she should have gotten back to me, like last time, I was getting nervous and very worried. You know how mothers get. I kept checking outside and checking my phone. Nothing. I was looking through the window of the house, wondering where my daughter was. She had gone to buy some groceries for dinner, but now it was getting dark, and that mountain road is dangerous at night sometimes. So now my heart is pumping. I say a quick prayer and went to the door to open it, because I swear in that moment, I thought I heard her outside. I could have sworn I heard her voice. Just as I walked past the window to the door, I noticed something outside. I turn around, and there was this hideous-looking thing trying to press its face up against the window and break in. I scream, running into the bedroom to grab my phone to call the police. The next thing you know, this thing is trying to break through the window, and it's hissing at me. I'm now lying by the bed on the floor, in full view of this thing, and I'm terrified. I'm gonna die. I'm going to die. I was convinced. And like the cavalry showing up in the nick of time, I catch a glimpse of the truck headlights pulling up, shining through the window. And I see this thing turn to look, and it takes off, darting into the trees. My daughter comes rushing into the house, checks on me. I am hysterical. I'm a 55-year-old woman with a bad hip. Had that thing gotten in the house, I would have been a goner. She saw it too. I know she did. We don't know what we saw, but it was really ugly looking and resembles a dog somewhat. I told her about hearing her voice just before I saw that thing, and she wonders if it had been watching us and mimicking my daughter's voice. My daughter knows a lot more about this kind of thing than I do. She suggested that it could be something called a Skinwalker, but I don't really know what that is. So she showed me your YouTube page and how you have so many episodes on this topic. Do you think you could help me out? What sort of being did we encounter?
Anybody that has been on the Navajo reservation has either probably heard of some creepy things or have experienced pretty creepy things, namely Skinwalkers. I have only seen one, and here is my story. I come from a small town in northern Arizona that's sandwiched between the Paiute Reservation to the north and the U.S.'s largest Navajo reservation to the south. My high school being so small, a 1A high school that has, on average, 80 students enrolled every year, always had to travel south about 10 hours one way to play another high school in any sport. This means we traveled a lot on the Navajo reservation, and we also usually stayed at hotels when we would head out to play and come home in the morning. But this trip was a little bit different. I remember the basketball coach saying that the school didn't have enough money to put up the teams and hotel that trip, so we were going to be on the road for a total of about 12 hours. I was the only male senior to play basketball that whole season. We had just got done playing our game and headed home on our bus, Big Blue. We were headed out, and it wasn't long, about 2 hours of driving before we had entered the reservation. By this time, everybody was asleep, with it being about 2 a.m. When we had crossed the reservation's border, I noticed the bus driver had sped up and was now going about 85 miles an hour. I thought this was a little weird because he never exceeded the speed limit, at least not in my high school career. For some reason, I couldn't fall asleep like the rest of my teammates, and I just sat at the back of the bus, staring out across the desolate desert landscape that was lit up by the full moon. As I looked out, I could see a figure running towards the bus at an angle of pursuit and keeping up with the bus at 85 miles an hour. As the figure got closer, I saw that it was a humanoid form. As a matter of fact, it looked exactly like a human, only that the face was painted half black and half white with glowing eyes. Glowing eyes like a rabbit's eyes reflecting light from a spotlight. I immediately thought, holy crap, it's a Skinwalker. The Skinwalker ran up to the edge of the road and just kept up pace with the bus, hurdling sagebrush and rocks while staring at me. After I made eye contact with the thing, I could not look away. It was as if something was holding my head and eyes in place, The Skinwalker just smiled at me in this inhuman smile that went ear to ear, showing crooked, yellow, pointed teeth. I felt like I was going to throw up, and I was panicking through the whole ordeal. The Skinwalker started to crumple down on all fours, still keeping up with the bus. I could see his bones crack and reform. Hair started appearing all over the thing's body, and in about 3 seconds was now a coyote, and it ran off back into the desert, far out of view. As soon as it was gone, I ran to the onboard bathroom and puked a mixture of food and blood. I didn't want to tell anyone for fear they would think I was crazy. I confided in my Navajo friend. She told me that I needed to see the chief, who also happened to be a big friend of mine, and get a blessing. I saw him the next day in school in the parking lot. He just came up to me and mumbled something in Navajo while waving a feathered scepter-like thing, turned around, got in his truck, and drove away. To this day, I haven't seen another Skinwalker. It might be due to the fact I moved away from that town and reservation, and if I do have to go south, I go around, way around. This happened a few months ago, and I've kept it to myself until recently, when I told my dad about it. I was with my brother, who we'll call John for now, and one of our old friends, and we were walking back through a forest, back to where we came from. Since I'm younger than both of them, they tend to annoy me a lot, but this time, they were being really annoying, so I decided to walk ahead. I was about halfway between them and the exit to the forest when I heard things snapping on my left. I just brushed it off and kept walking, but then I started to hear a low mumbling noise, so I stopped and looked around. I asked if anyone was there and got no reply, until about 40 seconds later, I heard what sounded like my brother saying, "Come here, I need your help." So I asked what was wrong while keeping my distance because something about his voice sounded wrong. It was distorted. So I waited for a few seconds. Then he said it again. "Come here, I need your help." But in the exact same way as before. So I moved to the side, and that's when I saw it. It was a deer, but it was on its back legs, and its body was rigid and twisted. But the worst part was its eyes. They were exactly the same as mine. I didn't believe that it was a bad creature. It actually seemed quite friendly, but nonetheless, I was scared. So I ran a mile back, and the whole time, I could feel it behind me when I got out of the forest. I fell to my knees and looked back to see it disappear behind some trees. But here's the weird thing. Ever since then, I've been having dreams about not being chased by it, or anything in the dreams I am in it. So I told my dad about this, and he did not look surprised or confused at all. He told me of similar events he had when he was young. Okay, before I start, I have had 7 encounters with Skinwalker. The first being when I was 9, and the last one being 3 months ago. I am now 16, so I don't know if what I call a Skinwalker is what everyone else thinks a Skinwalker is. I have been calling them that since the second encounter, when I was 10. Before I knew that Skinwalkers were already a thing. Okay, on to the story. Like I stated earlier, I am 16 and I currently live in Massachusetts. I have also lived in Michigan and Wisconsin and have had encounters in both. I live near Boston, but was going on a road trip with my friend and his family out to their new place in the more remote parts of Massachusetts. And yes, Massachusetts has remote parts. I'll call my friend Chad. We got to their house, and I was planning on staying for about a week to help them get settled in and to see the surrounding areas. At the edge of their property, they have these woods that start off with just a few trees here and there, but after a 5-minute walk, they get really damn thick. On the 3rd day of me being there, Chad's mom says she wants to give me and Chad a day off so we could do whatever we wanted. At first, we wandered around the property and hung around the house. Then, we choose to walk to the closest town. This takes 30 minutes. The town's small, and there isn't much to do, but I'm happy just to be back. We're in a place like I lived for most of my life. Small and in the middle of nowhere. We talked to the owner of an ice cream shop who told us a bit of history about the town. Nothing important or exciting. After that, we started back to Chad's house. We got back around noon, and I suggested we go for a walk in the woods. Chad, who isn't the outdoorsy type, said no, but after a couple of minutes of me nagging him to go, he agreed. Even though I go out all the time, I camp and walk trails, at night most of the time. I have gotten paranoid due to the Skinwalkers and other stuff, so I always like to have my pocket knife with me when I go out like this, so I ran to the house to go get it. We started into the woods, leaving a really obvious trail. Like I said, the woods are pretty thick. At first, Chad spends his time grumbling things like, there are too many bugs and it's too damn warm out to be doing this. Keep in mind, last month was October. After a while, he started to enjoy being outside and actually said he liked it and wanted to go farther into the woods. By now, it was about 4:30 and it was starting to get dark, but I didn't really care at all that much. We kept going, and dark fell rapidly, to the point where I couldn't see much. Okay, thank you for staying with me for the story this far. This is the part with the encounter. We had started on our way back, but at some point we got separated. I noticed this and turned the flashlight app on my phone on, spinning around to see if I could see Chad. I couldn't. I called out, "Can you hear me? Can you say something?" I waited, and a few moments later, off to my right, I heard a feeble stammer. Zach. Zach is my name. It sounded just like Chad, and I quickly turned in the direction of the noise and slowly walked toward it. I didn't see anything, so I moved my light horizontally to try and spot anything. I called out again, "Chad?" and got Zach. Again, it was much stronger and louder this time. I walked forward with more confidence, but stopped dead in my tracks as I heard something big moving very quickly through the brush right behind me. I whipped around frantically and came face to face with Chad. At first I was stunned. I had heard him from the opposite direction. Up to this point in my life, I'd only encountered a skinwalker with another person once, and we were together when it happened, so this situation was new to me. "What the? Why did you walk behind to get to me? Why didn't you come from the same direction as your voice?" I practically yelled at him, overcome by anger and being tricked. "What are you talking about? You were the one changing directions," Chad yelled back to me. "What?" I said quietly. I shined my light on him, and I could see he was obviously shaken. "I heard you call my name, and I started walking to you. You sounded scared or hurt at first, but after a few minutes, you started saying my name normally. Then you stopped answering my calls, and I heard you from behind me, and I saw your light, so I started running at you," he explained. I paled, finally putting the pieces together. I had encountered skinwalkers that could impersonate a person's voice before, and I realized that a skinwalker or something of the sort was in the woods with us. There was the faint noise of movement behind me, and I turned around to see a horrible sight, not 10 feet from me. Its head looked like a wolf's, like the kind you would see at the zoo. It was tall, maybe 6.5 feet tall. Its head, shoulders, arms, and chest were all covered in thick gray and white fur. Its legs and most of its stomach held a much thinner pelt of the same fur. Both Chad and myself saw this creature and ran faster than I thought we could. For whatever reason, the creature did not give chase, and we made it out of the forest without incident. Chad told his family, who of course didn't believe him. I didn't tell mine because they hadn't believed me about this stuff in the past. Chad has not gone back in the woods and has not seen the beast again. It didn't look like the other skinwalkers I had encountered before, and at this point, I only call it a skinwalker because I have no other name for it other than a wolfman, but I am not calling it that. I have looked it up and the only thing I could find is a werewolf, but I don't think that it is. For one reason, it wasn't a full moon out. If you have any ideas on what this creature was, I'm open to suggestions. So, I have been kind of wanting to share my creepy encounters and experiences for a bit, but what my sister told me a few days ago made me want to share this possible Skinwalker encounter. I'm Native American, and so my father and siblings. My mother has very little, but there is some. We are not involved with any tribes, but I do enjoy looking, reading, and trying to be active in the native culture. There are also plenty of tribes in the state I live in. A few weeks ago, I was asking my dad about the tribes around here and asking if there was a possibility that Skinwalkers could be up there. He kind of avoided the question, but did tell me that a tribe up north was notorious for murders, both by members and unexplained ones. I tried seeing if I could get any more answers from him, but there was nothing else. Now, time for the actual encounters. Both my sister and I have experienced them the most, but my brother has also had some unexplained scratching and whispering at night. It was rare, but it did happen. The encounter started at the beginning of the summer in 2017. Now, me and my sister share a room. She's always been scared of the dark, so being the nice big brother I am, I have shared a room with her always. Anyway, it was around maybe 11 p.m. when me and my sister heard a weird sound. It sounded like a bird call, but definitely not normal. It sounded like someone with strep throat trying to mimic a crow. Both me and my sister kind of just looked up from our phones and gave each other a weird look. We live in an apartment complex that's located on the edge of a small town. The town is a druggie town, so for like the first hour, we thought it was just some druggie outside tripping out. But it lasted about 3 hours, ending around 2 a.m. My sister had fallen asleep, and everything else was quiet. But then I heard the big dogs down the road start barking like crazy. I thought it was just weird timing, or that they saw an animal. But looking back, I think it might have been a Skinwalker. A few weeks go by, and the same sound starts at around 10 p.m., or maybe 11, and would usually end around 1 or 2 in the morning. At first, me and my sister didn't really pay attention to it, and eventually thought it was actually a weird bird. But one night I had slept over at my friend's house, which was a trailer on the edge of town right near mine. Me and my friend were just about to fall asleep on the couches when I heard that same sound. I sat up straight and looked at my friend. "You heard that, right?" I'd asked her, thinking it was imaginary. "Yeah, it sounded like a bird." "Why?" she told me back, probably thinking I was crazy. "Oh, it's nothing. I just hear that a lot," I replied back. If I told her, she probably would have believed me, but I just tried to make it seem like nothing. That night, the sound lasted until I fell asleep. Fast forward another week, and we're hearing the same sounds at night. My sister now was starting to get paranoid. I was too, but I just told her it was nothing, just a dumb bird. At this point in the summer, I was listening to lots of Skinwalker stories and started connecting their similarities to what was happening with me. One night, me and my sister were just chilling in our beds with our windows open when the noises started up again. This time they sounded more ragged and sick. They stopped pretty quickly after they started. Me and my sister just shrugged at each other and went back to our phones when suddenly, right next to our window, we heard the most blood-curdling scream. It wasn't human. It sounded like a baby screaming, crossed with a dog's yelp. With that sound ringing in our ears, me and my sister both jumped and she screamed, hiding under her covers. I honestly hid under my covers with my heart racing. We waited what seemed like hours until my sister whisper yelled at me, asking if it was safe. I had to put my big boy pants on and uncover to close the window. I did so rather quickly, but when I got to the window, nothing was there. My sister wanted to tell our parents, but I knew they'd never believe us. The next day, though, I had asked if they had heard anything, which they said they had not. I brought this stuff up to my 3 friends one night while having a sleepover. At first, most of them took it as a joke, but then I explained how I felt that I was being followed and having a sense of dread 24/7. They then seemed to believe me, and I told them that I thought it followed me to their houses. And what freaked us all out was that night, my friend's dog started barking and growling like crazy. Afterwards, one of my friends had remarked, "Why did we become friends with a Native American? It made us laugh and calm the atmosphere the rest of the night. Back home, my sister had told me that the noises stopped while I was gone, which pretty much had confirmed to me that it was indeed following me. Constantly now, I was feeling dread and could not sleep at night. That scream ringing in my ears and the sound outside increasing by each night, sounding more and more sickly. Like I said, this had been lasting all summer, so eventually we just got used to it. Sometimes it sounded like there was more than one, but as long as it didn't get close, we didn't care. At my friend's house, it was still the same, paranoid of seeing it. Even walking my dogs at night freaked me out because their gaze would fixate on something in the tree line, just out of my sight. They wouldn't bark or anything, just stare, then start sprinting towards home. I'd follow, gripping the leash so they wouldn't get away. It really freaked me out. One night, I caught a glimpse of it though, through the curtain crack. The noise had gotten closer. Me and my sister were prepared to hear another of those terrible screams, but no. I looked out the window as the wind blew in, and I saw what I believe was the Skinwalker. It looked so sickly and thin, its eyes sunken, and its face looked like it was scowling. I just stared at it until the curtain moved back. Then it was gone. The dread had filled me even more. After that, we heard less and less. Towards the end of the summer, we had heard it again, and I decided to record the sound. It sounds weirder on the recording, but it's there. I wish there was a way to show it, but everything had died down until recently. I still have the constant feeling of dread, and I've become more paranoid, but I know what I've been experiencing and hearing is real. Last month, me, my siblings, and Dad saw a white deer. I know that means good luck, but just the other day, after my dad picked me up from work, he told me that on the way, he had seen a white wolf sitting on the side of the road, just watching the cars. I don't know if this is significant, but it's something to note. Also, my sister has been experiencing stuff all in her room. Just last week, she came running out of the room, saying she had heard scratching at the window. It's all just super freaky and weird. I'm already kind of a paranoid guy, but this is just all too weird just to be a coincidence. I just hope it stops. I'd love to get a good night of sleep. When I was younger than 10, maybe around 8 or 9, I was living in an apartment complex in Seymour, Indiana. A nice little place. I was playing with some friends of mine at the attached playground of the complex, when I swore I heard my mother calling for me to come over. But it was not in the direction I knew she was at, but instead the opposite direction. I was confused, so I told them I would be back, and I spoke to my mom, who was smoking with my aunt and grandmother. I asked her what she needed, and she was confused, saying, "I didn't say anything. Go ahead and keep playing." So I went back and went about my business, not hearing the voice again. I swear up and down that it was her voice. A few years down the road, I was watching an episode of Found Tapes, that old mockumentary that used to air on Animal Planet. It was the Skinwalker episode, and I remember feeling a chill down my spine as the event from my childhood went through my head once more. At that moment, I felt I had narrowly avoided an encounter with these things. I don't have any records of hallucinations, and the place where my mom was smoking was at least a good 3 to 4 minute walk away from the playground. Can't really say on the matter of if this is a real encounter, but I figured it was enough to finally post it on the internet. So, let me go ahead and give you some background information to where and when this encounter happened. The place this encounter took place is at the Centennial Valley, which is the most beautiful place on Earth, in my opinion. But the downside to it is that it's about 4 hours north of bumfuck nowhere, and is near many Native American hunting and arrowhead making spots, so it does have the right area for a skinwalker, or something of the sort, to be there. I was about 14 when this happened, and I still go there, even after the encounter, believe it or not. So, what happened was, I was exploring the hills near me, when me and my family usually stayed during visits, so I knew the area fairly well, but it is very large, so I don't know all of it. But anyway, I was exploring a hill I hadn't been to very often when suddenly I get this odd feeling of dread that just suddenly washed over me. So I looked around to see if anything weird was causing, and when I noticed my dog Joey, who is not easily frightened, but even he looked scared. But I was armed with a recurve bow and bear spray, so I decided to continue on my trek despite the bad feelings. After about 20 minutes of walking, the feeling came back, only a bit stronger, and I could feel my adrenaline starting to pump through my veins. So I glanced around again, but this time I saw a coyote with a tattered hide running on the tip of the hill. But the odd part of this was it was angling. It ran towards me, which was odd considering I had a large dog, a German Shepherd and Rottweiler breed, in case that might mean something. And my dog usually scared most animals off because of his loud bark. So as the coyote continued its descent, I decided to fire a shot from my bow just to try and scare it off. I aimed my bow just a bit in front of the small beast, but as I released the arrow, the coyote sped up slightly. After about a second, the arrow had impaled the creature. Shocked because of the sudden increase in speed of the little thing, I decided to go up and make sure the coyote was dead. As I walked up the hill, the beast began to move and wiggle itself off the arrow, and then one instant it was on the arrow, the next it was off and giving me a death stare. At this point, my dog was freaking out, and then I started barking as the beast began to walk in my direction, only it was standing on its hind legs. Startled, I quickly put another arrow on my bow, this time with a broad head, and I shot the coyote dead in the chest. This time, a little freaked out and just as much convinced that it must be dead now, I began to walk home when again it got off the arrow and began to run again. Only this time, I was thoroughly freaked out and on the verge of shitting myself, so I broke into a dead sprint back for home, only stopping to make sure my dog didn't try and fight the monster, only he was ahead of me. After about 10 minutes, I was completely out of breath and I could not hear the beast running behind me, so I decided I would hit it with one more arrow to give me another momentary head start. When I knocked the arrow and turned back to find the creature was standing on a perch farther back than where it had started. I calmed down somewhat and I started walking home, and I never saw that monstrosity again, and hopefully I never will. I have been hesitant on posting any story mainly due to the fact that I don't want anyone ever thinking that I or the person in the story is about is crazy. Although saying this actually happened sounds very cliche, but I can assure you the following stories are true. Now, before I begin the first story, just for a bit of background, I am an intern for a church that does work on a Navajo reservation site, helping the community on people's homes like roofing repair, repainting, and interior fixing. 8 to 5 with good pay and nice people, so overall, I'm happy with it. And as a bit of a disclaimer, I'm not trying to offend Navajo tradition in any way. This is just a first-hand story of what is currently happening on my trip. Over the past 2 months of the internship, I've begun to grow fairly close with some of the residents on the res. One lady in particular that I got to know pretty well was the superstitious type, like said never be outside at night, or other random seeming things to me, like that. But the biggest taboo I never knew to mention, mainly because I was told by my superiors, was Navajo folklore, like Skinwalkers. However, one day it was very different in the sense that the question was just burning within me. I was on my lunch break after wrapping up painting parts of her house, and she sits next to me on her porch, and we talk for a while, but I finally feel comfortable enough to ask her about any folklore about werewolves or anything of that sorts. I didn't really expect a response. I thought maybe she'd quickly say no and then change the topic. But if anything, I was more scared I might offend her. But to my surprise, she turns her head looking toward the outside scenery, hesitates, but then says, "Yes, I know some, and I've experienced it too." She proceeded to tell me a description on the apparent equivalent to a werewolf. To paraphrase, she said this: Werewolves look like normal people, but masked in a white paint, covering their face, arms, and chest. Their whole body is white as corpse, covered with black symbols, quite possibly related to devil worshipping. More specifically, they are gravediggers and necromancers as well. They dig up bodies only to steal jewelry, although they may perform other acts to corpses, as she quickly strayed away from going into too much detail about that. Werewolves also get their power from the devil. That is how they are able to possess such supernatural strength and endurance. I was surprised to hear this, although I figured werewolves wouldn't look anything like that in Twilight or Scooby-Doo. Although, deep down, even I thought she sounded a bit crazy. Before I could ask more questions about these werewolves, she began to tell me her own stories and interactions with these supernatural beasts, and her story still gives me the chills. She explained that one day, her and her husband were driving on the curvy roads alongside the mountains, only to find a woman with her face covered by her hands and was kneeling in the middle of the road, appearing as though she was crying. The woman looks up towards the car headlights to reveal the very same white paint and sacrificial symbols mentioned previously. Her husband honked his horn and quickly slams on the brakes, only to be too late, and hears the loud cracking sound of the woman's bones and the splash of blood all over the windshield. Once her and her husband stopped the car safely and processed what the hell just happened, they quickly run over to the spot to where they hit the woman. However, once they got to the spot, there was no body. But not only that, there was no trace of blood either. And just as a side note, this part of the res had some cliffs, but it was relatively flat land, so it would be obvious to tell where somebody is, especially if they just got hit by a car. Puzzled by what the possible explanation could be for this occurrence, her and her husband drove back home, trying to neglect the thought that they had just witnessed a werewolf. However, being the non-paranormal believers that they were at the time, they tried to just close this mind's occurrence off as them just losing their mind. As interesting as her story was, this got me thinking, is it possible for this werewolf story to be true? Or is this her own way of describing a skinwalker or other supernatural phenomenon because she didn't think I knew what a skinwalker was? This question kept circulating through my head, so as you could expect, the following nights made it harder for me to sleep comfortably. Because of that, during the workdays, I would feel more and more mentally drained, almost paranoid. At the end of week around 6, I was sitting in the car, driving back to the church site, and was in the mental state of mind where I was half awake and half asleep. My buddy was driving and claimed that he wanted to pull over to the gas station that was near the church to grab a couple of snacks to munch on during our debrief time in our cabin. Since I was too tired to argue, I said fine and laid my face against the window and tried to doze off for a while waiting for my friend. However, I had the weirdest feeling that I was being watched. So naturally, I opened my eyes and looked out the window. I saw nothing. However, when I turned my head, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a white figure, just as the woman described previously. I looked back and nothing was there. But I swear I saw something. Since it was beginning to get darker outside, I quickly sat up in my seat to readjust my vision. But when I looked back out the window, it was almost as though the figure had vanished. Perplexed, I stepped outside the car and looked around, but there was no trace of a creature even existing. My buddy comes back to the car and questions what the heck I was doing. Debating whether or not I should tell him, I decided to just say, "Oh, I'm just getting some fresh air. Let's head out." The following days have been even worse for me. My mood is getting worse. I'm feeling way more paranoid that something is out there. And at night, I can almost swear that I hear a scream in the far distance. Everything outside just looks 100 times scarier too, because there's barely any outside light, besides the moon. So everything has more of an exaggerated appearance. But believe me, I know I sound crazy, but the worst part is that if I tell anyone, they'll think I'm crazy too. So I've been debating whether or not I actually saw the werewolf or skinwalker the lady described, or if it was just maybe my tired eyes playing tricks on me. I hope someone can find some sort of answer to this mystery. Also, if you have any similar paranormal stories like this, please share in the comments. Hi all. I'm not sure where to start, but I used to drive through one of the reses in my state to go get my therapy appointments, as the freeways were always jam-packed at rush hour. It was a pretty normal thing to do, but I had driven through there one night with my friend to avoid traffic on the way to a party, and they started talking about how their friends avoid the res at night because of the paranormal. My first mistake was to then say out loud, "You mean skinwalkers?" Now, I've always been afraid of spirits or creatures coming after me in the night. But recently, a little over a year later, I am experiencing tapping on my windows and sounds I can't quite explain, as well as visual experiences out my window that I can't explain, like figures moving. I don't know if this is more related to a skinwalker or a wendigo hunting. Hi. I live in Western Australia, and there's been some spooky things happening lately. Not sure if this is a skinwalker or something similar, but figured here would be a good place to ask. Over the past month or so, every night around midnight, my motion detector light goes off outside of my house. I'll peek through the window and see an animal just staring at my home. It's normally a smaller animal, like a cat or dog, but then after a while, it will turn and go away. One night, it happened again, but it wasn't a dog or a cat. It was a man, and he looked like he had a fur cloak on. From what I could see, it was dog fur. I was having a heart attack, but then he started walking towards my house. I immediately closed the blinds, and after a minute or so, opened them again. He was gone, and I saw a cat walking away from my house, going the exact way he had. Is this a skinwalker? Or maybe an Australian version of one? Sorry if this is rough around the edges, I just don't remember it that well. If it happens again tonight, I'll post a new thing about it. I'm new here, but with everything that's going on, it's about time I shared some of my experiences. There's a resort over by Lake Powell, and it's a little nicer, and the cultural influences feel more genuine, as we would often have members from local tribes show us to the mesas and hikes and whatnot. We had this one guy who was our homie, and he took us everywhere and would tell us all the stories and whatever. There were these caves they were not allowed to go in though. They were rather beautiful because he warned us bad creatures lived there. When I would pry into which kind, I asked mountain lions? No, we have guns to protect us from those. And I was left stumped. A few days later, there's an eclipse. For reference, it was the second-ish week of January to maybe early February 2019 I went. I was out by the pool viewing as they had shut the lights off and there were few guests because it was off-season. My friend went back to the room to grab another blanket. I was getting excited as it was getting closer and closer to the peak of the eclipse. I thought I saw him coming through the slats in the fence area around where I was. I saw what looked to be a tallish guy who was slightly hunched over, forward, and had a light by the head area. I thought maybe my friend was on the phone and wrapped in a blanket, which was normal for him. I ran around the corner to tell him to hurry up, and it was gone. A little confused, but hey, the lights were dimmed if not off, and I was so excited that I brushed it off. We were in a car to drive to our next activity the following day with our buddy I mentioned prior. I hadn't told my friend yet, so I told him my story, and our buddy looks back at me. He tells me about the Skinwalkers, how they sell their souls, and I was lucky to have seen one and been okay. First time I have ever heard these, I lived on the East Coast. Long story short though, our trip ends on the last day. We are packing the car and our buddy finds me. He gives me a dream catcher and some tea and some feathers. I emphasize gives me as I didn't have to pay. and tells me to stay safe. Nothing too serious, but something rubbed me the wrong way, and I trust my gut too much. So, I spend a lot of time out at my friend's property in Plateville, Colorado. So 2 nights we were just hanging out, and I decided that it was late and I should head home. It was about 12 a.m., so I got in my car and I was driving down his dirt road when my headlights suddenly dim and my motor sounds strained, so I slow down. I drive a pretty modified car, so it has weird issues a lot, so I wasn't worried. So I open my glove box and get my flashlight, and then I look up and see something standing in the road. I quickly reach back into the glove box and grab my gun. So I hit the flashlight and the thing starts to move. It looked like a coyote, but a lot bigger, and instead of paws in the front, it had almost human-like hands. The only issue was this thing was massive. It was the size of a St. Bernard. It walked off the road into the field. I tried to find it with the flashlight, but it was gone. So I get back into my car and take off, and it wasn't acting weird anymore. About 5 minutes later, the same thing happens, and that creature is just sitting in the road again. This time, I didn't stop. I just kept going and didn't hit anything until it was gone. I grew up on a farm, so I'm used to strange noises and weird animals. This thing was different. I've never been this scared in my whole life. I was shaking and short of breath for at least 2 hours afterwards. Hi guys, I've been following this page for a while and I recently had a crazy experience. So here's one of my stories. So a little bit of background. I live in southern Utah, and this area basically belonged to the Native Americans for a very long time. There are old ghost towns nearby and very old graveyards from when the pioneers came in and tried to mine and settle in the area. There is a lot of reservation around also. So basically the perfect cocktail for weird stuff. Anyway, I was out in BLM land one evening by myself because my girlfriend was pulling an all-nighter at the hospital. I was just driving my truck down this dirt road that connects Silver Reef, which is an old mining ghost town, and St. George. I figured I need to get out of the house with the quarantine. No place better to go in the middle of nowhere, so I would not have to be around people. It was late, and there was about an hour of sunlight left, so I pulled over and hiked this beautiful trail that the cattle had made that leads into a slot canyon. I had a flashlight and a headlamp, so I figured I would be fine if I wasn't back by dark. So the hike was going great, and the slot canyon had led me to an area with a lot of Utah juniper trees. It was very pretty, but as I kept hiking, I kept getting this weird feeling like I wasn't the only one out there, like there was something else behind me. I kept checking behind me, but saw nothing. I figured I was pushing my luck because I already lost the sun, so I started hiking back. I was about 3 miles from my truck when I heard something behind me. It sounded like an animal breathing, but like it had been running. When I flashed my lights, I saw nothing. So I kept walking, and after about 40 yards, I heard it again, so I started to get nervous. I knew that the area I was in was most likely Skinwalker territory, so I said in a calm voice, "I'm sorry if I'm not welcome in this area. I will leave now." As I approached the slot canyon, I saw a shadow run past the entrance, and I stopped, dead in my tracks. I could hear the breathing again from the bushes by the canyon, so I ran straight through the canyon and out the other side. I was about 0.5 miles away from my truck, once on the other side of the canyon. As I kept walking, I kept my guard up because of what I had seen, but I had heard the breathing again, and then even worse, I heard whispers. Nothing I can make out, but I know what I heard. So I ran, and right before I got to my truck, I saw what looked like a deer, but had an odd-shaped head, like more round than normal, and I could see its eyes, and they didn't look like a deer eyes. As I had my headlamp on it, I flashed my flashlight on it and ran before my light reached it. It didn't hesitate or run straight for my truck and jump in. I drove straight home and slept with the light on that night. Thank you for reading my experience. I would love to hear what you guys think. This isn't my only experience, but it is certainly my most scary. This happened when I was about 9 or 10, which is why I'm not exactly sure on the specifics of the encounter. However, I think I've figured out pretty much well how it went from thinking it over so many years now. I am absolutely certain of the few brief seconds I encountered the creature. When I was younger, I lived in Texas, which is what makes me think it was a skinwalker and not something else since it's down south. And at the back of my house was a 7-foot-tall cattle fence, which I would often look through to watch the cows on the other side. There was a small thicket, 200 to 300 feet away from the fence. I went out one day to watch the cows, which were pretty far away from the fence. While I was standing there, I guess I didn't notice it approach me, even though it was probably not more than a foot away. But I turned my head to the right and saw a big buck staring me down. I don't know how it walked up to the fence without being noticed by me or noticing me, since deer in general are very skittish. This is one of the reasons I believe it wasn't a normal deer. The next reason is that while our eyes were locked, its eyes didn't look natural. They didn't look malevolent, but they weren't normal animal eyes. They seemed to possess an intelligent quality, as if staring into my soul. The moment that we locked eyes couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, with one motion, the buck jumped over the fence so fast that I didn't even see it jump. I was grasping the fence before the encounter, and the buck's back hooves must have clipped it because I heard a metallic clang and felt the fence vibrate in my hands. Deer can clear fences as high as 8 feet, so I guess the height isn't that odd. What is odd to me is that the deer and I were side by side, and I was holding onto the fence, so I'm not sure how the deer could have cleared it without momentum. Then again, I don't have experience with deer, so it could be something they're able to do. I don't know. Anyway, it bounded into the thicket, and I saw a doe, what I think was a doe, joined in there. But I waited for them to come out and they didn't, which is also very odd to me. The thicket wasn't big either. Another odd thing I just realized is while we were out there during the day, because as far as I know, deer are mainly nocturnal, and this was midday. After this happened, I ran inside and told my mom and dad, and that's basically where it ended. I've been wondering if anyone has had similar encounters to mine for years, because while parts of the encounter are kind of normal for deer, other parts are wildly irregular or out there for deer behavior. If anyone has similar stories, I would love to hear them, and if anyone can tell me if what I encountered was a skinwalker or something else, please let me know. Could this have been a skinwalker, adorned and dressed as a deer? I have believed in skinwalkers for most of my life, and I'm confident that I've seen a skinwalker 2 times. I grew up spending a lot of time in southwest Colorado by the Four Corners where there are Navajo and Indian reservations. In the small town of Cortez, which is a non-reservation, there is a story known by the locals about this place called Skinwalker Lane. It's this old dirt road just outside the reservation that leads to an abandoned cabin. The cabin is decades old and is said to have been built unrightfully on Indian burial grounds by white men. As the story goes, a white family lived there and disappeared mysteriously. As a couple of dumb teenagers, me and a few of my cousins didn't believe in, well, what we thought was a hoax, Skinwalker Lane, and wanted to go check it out. We all piled into our old Jeep SUV and drove all the way out to Skinwalker Lane at about 11 p.m. at night when it was pitch black. The sky was lit up from the moon, and you can make out the peaks of Sleeping Mountain in the distance, and the edges of the willows which line either side of Skinwalker Lane. As we slowly eased down the road, the car got quiet, and we all had a weird feeling. Deer in groups of 2 or 3 kept poking their heads out of the willows and just stared at us without caution. I thought this was weird because deer are usually jumpy creatures. After about 1.5 miles of this road, we finally get to the clearing, which opened up to a big field. At the other end of the field, you could see the old cabin. At this point, we were creeped out and reluctantly continued across the lightly used road until we were about 150 feet from the cabin. The cabin was very dark, the wood was rotted, and there were weird carvings all over it that looked like some sort of tribal symbols. We decided to just sit and look at it for a while to see if anything had happened, since we were all too scared to walk up to it. Out of nowhere, this shrill, skin-peeling howl came out of nowhere. It was a long howl, but by the time it had ended, it changed and sounded more like a man screaming. From the left side, something on 2 feet ran heavy-footed behind the cabin, but on the other side came out an enormous coyote, which looked more similar to a wolf in size. The coyote just stood and stared us down, eyes glowing a deep blood red. We were so freaked out and drove out immediately. I will always believe in skinwalkers after that night. I can't exactly say I've always been a believer in skinwalkers. My dad used to talk about them and how he believed in them, but I always thought it was silly. Tonight, that changed. I snuck out of my house to go out on a walk. It was about 2 a.m., and my parents didn't exactly know. It was mildly peaceful. I'm not very much afraid of the dark, so I don't get anxious from these kinds of walks. It's windy tonight, so there were a lot of loud noises. I got far from my house, where there is a large stretch of woods. It's an area where we don't usually see deer because it's close to a highway. It's southern Maryland, so it's usually foxes and birds at best. I inspected the woods and had the most terrifying and blood-curdling fear when I saw what I can only really describe as a skinny, disfigured silhouette with antlers. But not like a big deer. They were small. It stood tall and is unlike anything I've seen. I cannot even comprehend what I've seen. I don't know if it could have been real, and within 10 seconds of seeing, I took off running, and I couldn't think of anything else to do. I ran fast, not looking back, I was so terrified. I ran through my neighbor's yard to get home faster. I don't know how to feel about it. I don't know if I'm overreacting and I just saw a deer or something, but I don't know if I can sleep. I'm constantly looking outside and terrified. Okay, so my dad bought a cabin in the woods about 3 years ago, and I've gone every other weekend, but I don't know if I should go. Me and my friends decided to go this weekend, so we all packed up and began a 3-hour drive. We got there late, so we just went to the front yard and started a fire. Only thing we had brought in the house at this point were sleeping essentials, so one of my friends decides to take a piss in the woods. He was gone for maybe 40 minutes. When he got back, he looked pale. I asked him what was wrong, and he looked at me and said nothing after about 2 hours. We then went inside, and we all went to our separate rooms. And after about another 2 or 3 more hours of sleeping, at about 4 a.m., rolled around, I was woken up by my friend's screams when I went into his room. He was gone. I ran downstairs to the car where my other friend was sitting, waiting desperately for me. I jumped in and I asked him what had happened. He started to drive at about 90. I saw a black figure in the tree line running towards the car. It was keeping up with us, and I was astonished, but after a while it stopped and turned towards the cabin. We didn't see it, and so we stopped driving until we get to the nearest town when we get back to my place. My friend told me what he had seen. He told me that he had heard the screams and ran into the room, but when he got there, he just saw a black figure in a window, and it looked like a wolf, but stood like a man, and it had our other friend in its mouth. He said that the creature ran into the forest with our friend, and he then ran to the car and saw me running out. I don't know if I could ever go back to that cabin again. In January of 2010, I was driving to LA after spending the holidays with family. I-40 the whole way. After a long day of driving, I stopped at Holbrook, Arizona to get a hotel for the night. I get the room, pull around to the back parking lot, and park my car. I open the back door and start to grab my bags and get my stuff together I was going to take inside for the night. All of a sudden, I hear a crazy sounding roar. The closest I can come to describing it is that it sounded like a mixture of a bear roaring, a pig squealing, and a baby crying. I freeze, look up, and standing on the edge of the raised parking lot next door was some kind of man-dog thing. It was probably around 7 to 8 feet tall. I look at it, it roars again, and I take off running towards my hotel room. I get to the door, scared shitless, fumbling with my key card, and it roars again like it's just to the left of me. I get the key in the door, lock the door, and run to the bathroom and lock that door too. I sat there for maybe 30 minutes. Then I grabbed my pillows and blankets off the bed and slept in the bathtub all night with the door locked. I started searching on my phone for what the hell that was and what it could have been, and that's when I learned about skinwalkers. If that exists, then what the hell else does that isn't supposed to? What was almost just as crazy is that when I bolted towards my room, I left my car unlocked and the doors wide open. They stayed open all night and nothing was taken or stolen, and I had a bunch of music equipment in there. But yeah, be careful on the edges of the Navajo reservation. When I was a young boy, my grandfather used to talk about all of the mysteries of a world. Back when I was around 7, my grandfather came down with cancer. He had been a smoker for most of his life, but he never really did it in front of me. So I was completely oblivious to the situation that was happening. He would sit me down and rock me and tell me all these stories about when the sun would talk to the moon and the birds were our friends and when we needed friends. But as I grew older, I asked deeper questions. Questions he would answer with, "It's not time for that." When I was 12, my grandfather passed away. My mother was the only child of my grandfather, and she was so broken by his passing, she never got rid of anything he had. During my sophomore year of high school, I was thinking about the things in the basement of my house, and I remember the feeling of digging through all of his dusty books and old pieces of clothing. The smell was something like bourbon, like an old shed of rotting wood. I got down to the last few items in the box, and I saw a blue book face down with my name on it. I grabbed it and opened the first page for it to read, "Dear Jesse, open when you are 16. There was a large S with lines through it on the third page. The book was telling me how to craft weapons for something. Nothing came to mind about the book, so I kept flipping and flipping. Then it was a picture, a tall figure with the dark skin and haunting lower jaw. It read Skinwalker, with a 23 on the right of it. I read the description of what it was and spooked when I got done. The numbers were the amount of Southwest that were killed, I think, or that he had seen. Did I go too far and find something worth sharing?